I put together a new flowchart that includes the general ratios. I've tried to approximate the yields and upkeeps of some of the main buildings and districts that you will pretty much build every single playthrough. Unfortunately, I can't give you a perfect template of exactly, say, how many mining districts you need to build for every industrial district, because there are a lot of variables that affect exactly how much each building outputs. Things like your species traits, the technology you've researched, the habitability of the world you're on, the traits of your leaders, and so on. But I have compared the yields and upkeep for the start of the game compared to towards the late game, so you can kind of get an idea of where your buildings will lie. As your empire progresses, you'll drift more towards the upper end of the scale. I'll start with energy. So we'll start out with your generator district. The first thing you need is you need to have an available district slot on your planet. You get district slots from the size of your planet. However, you also need a planetary feature that allows you to build a generator district. So you need to have the right amount of generator district slots available on your planet, as well as just general district slots on your planet. If you meet both of these conditions up here, then you can spend 300 minerals to build your generator district. It takes some time, and the second the generator district is built, you pay this upkeep of about 1 energy per month. Regardless of whether it is employed or not, you pay this energy. That leads to you get 2 housing. There is a civic that allows you to get 3 housing from this, but most cases it's 2 housing. And it also produces 2 technician jobs. The housing covers your technicians. So technicians, the jobs on their own mean nothing without a pop working that job. A pop, if they're an organic pop, then they cost 1 food upkeep. If they're a lithoid pop, they cost about 1 mineral upkeep. Or if they're a robot, they cost about 1 energy upkeep. And also, if you are a plantoid or a fungoid, you can get a civic that allows you to have about half food, half energy upkeep. And then, depending on the rights of your pop, you have about 0 to 1 consumer goods upkeep. So, like if they are a ruler, they'll have 1, or if you have Utopia living standards, they'll have 1. If they're a worker, they'll have something in between, like a 0.25 or something like that. A specialist might have 0.5 on kind of the basic standards. That depends on how you've set the species rights. So in the species rights tab, you can change their standard of living. That affects their happiness. Their happiness doesn't directly correlate to their output as an individual, but their happiness ties to the planet approval rating. A low planet approval rating will decrease the planetary stability, and stability directly correlates to job output, so you can get anywhere between a negative 30% output and plus 30% output from a high or low planetary stability. So by improving their happiness, you generally lead to a higher stability and thus a higher output. If they're a Gestalt consciousness, they'll have 0. Some living standards can also have 0 as well. And then you have amenities. They generally require actually more like 0.5 to 1 instead of 0.75 to 1. For a non-Gestalt consciousness, a deficit or abundance of amenities affects the happiness of your pops, whereas for a Gestalt consciousness, a deficit or abundance directly adds a stability modifier to your planet. Amenities is a resource that you do not have empire-wide. It is calculated on a planet-by-planet basis. You can't exchange amenities between planets. You have to produce them locally. Low habitability can increase your pop's amenities usage as well. Every pop needs 0.75 to 1 housing. Much like amenities, housing is calculated on a planet-by-planet basis, so you cannot exchange housing between planets. If you do not have enough housing for your population, you get an overcrowding stability modifier on your planet, and your pops will be more likely to migrate away from your planet if that is a valid option for them. Eventually, you will also get a pop growth speed reduction if your overcrowding problem gets too large. This kind of upkeep here for your pop is super common. You're going to see this over and over and over and over again. Fortunately, these pops will be covered by the district, so you don't need to really worry about the housing in this equation, but what you need to consider for the generator district is you need these. And these technician jobs are employed. Each technician produces about 6 to 25 energy is about what I found in my research. You might be able to find outliers. Obviously, if there's high devastation, you're going to get less than this. But this is kind of the general range for a nominally stable, mostly habitable planet. So in the early game, about 6 from each technician. So that's about 12 energy credits, minus, of course, this. So you're getting about 11 positive energy credits or so. And in the late game, when you have like a specialized planet specifically built for energy production, you can kind of start seeing these ranges per technician. So that's the basics of generator districts. You're going to see a common trend with these basic resources. So kind of like the generator district, you need a district slot available, and you also need a mining district slot as well, specifically a mining district from your planetary features. And then you pay 300 minerals in order to construct your mining district. It has the same, you need a upkeep of energy that is regardless of whether the jobs are being worked or not. It produces 2 housing, 2 minor jobs, and we saw this before. You're going to see this very, very often. I'm not going to keep talking about it. Every time you have a job being worked, this is a cost that you are paying. I could have made this a key and just put it in the corner and talked about it, and then just every time you see this icon, just know that it means, all of this. But the reason I decided to keep it all in is that way you can really feel the impact of how much things cost. It costs a lot to keep your pops running. You inevitably need to pay this cost anyways, regardless of whether they're working or not. Per miner job, I found approximately like 4 to 18 minerals per miner job. So that's mining districts done, pretty straightforward, fairly simple, and agriculture districts is nothing too fancy or new. In order to build the district, you need a district slot and also an agriculture planetary feature available. Costs 300 minerals. You produce 2 farmer jobs, which produce about 6 to 25 food. All right, so these are your basic resources. These are the bread and butter of every economy, albeit the food is not necessary for quite a few different empires, like lithoids and machines that don't really care about the food, but the energy and minerals, every single game you will be constructing these all the time. So moving on, I'm going to move on to the industrial district. So the difference between industrial districts and the basic resource districts is that they don't require a planetary feature. They only require a district slot. Max size 25 planet could have 25 industrial districts on it, whereas this planet could be a size 25 planet but only could have like 3 energy districts depending on the planetary features. The idea in my head being that you can kind of put factories anywhere, but you can only mine minerals if there is a ore deposit. You can only grow food on arable land. You can only extract like hydroelectric from a good river, but you can kind of plop a factory anywhere that you have the space for it. It also is more expensive to build. It costs 500 minerals instead of only 300. Industrial districts at their default produce 1 metallurgist and 1 artisan if the job is employed. On top of the actual upkeep of the pop working the job and the district running itself, artisans and metallurgists turn minerals into other resources. So they actually require minerals in order to do that conversion process, whereas these basic resources are just extracting it directly from nature. So your cost is going to be about 6 to 12 minerals for both. The arrows are a little bit confusing, but just imagine that this arrow goes here too. Expect to see about 4 to 12 alloys from your metallurgist, or you can expect to see about 8 to 14 consumer goods from your artisan. And one other thing to note is that using the planetary designation feature, if you have a planet designated as a foundry world, each industrial district you have on the planet, instead of producing 1 of each, it'll produce 2 metallurgists, no artisans. So if you want to prioritize alloy production, you can do that. And inversely, if you set it to a factory world, you'll produce 2 artisans and no metallurgists. So there is a way if you want to specialize your industrial district. So next up, we have, depending on whether you are spiritualist or not, you will either have bureaucratic offices or temples, and unlike the districts that we've covered before, they require a building slot, and you require about 400 minerals. The upkeep is generally about 2 energy. When you construct it, by default, it gives you 2. If it's a bureaucratic office, 2 bureaucrats, and if it's a temple, 2 priests. However, if you upgrade the building, it adds the upkeep of rare crystals, but you can then get 4 jobs or then 6 jobs with the next upgrade so that you can better use your building slots more efficiently. So you can get more jobs per building slot. And then these jobs convert consumer goods, about 1 to 3, into unity. Unity is very important for progressing your empire's culture and beliefs and things like that. And they can produce around 4 to 12. These buildings have different variants for Gestalt consciousnesses, but I didn't want to put like 4 icons here. Similar to that, another ideological resource. Ignore that. Don't look at this. Don't look at that. So then you have research labs. which also require a building slot to build. They cost about 400 minerals. They have an upkeep of about 2 energy. They produce 2 researcher jobs. And if you upgrade the building, you add the upkeep of exotic gases, and then you can get 4 and then 6 researchers. It works the same way as before. And you also have about 1 to 3 consumer goods per researcher, and each researcher gives you about 4 to 12 of your physics research, society research, and your engineering research. They can have differing numbers, so you might be able to make like 5 physics, but only 4 society and 4 engineering, depending on the traits. So these aren't like fixed to the same number. So we've talked a little bit about these strategic resources such as rare crystals and exotic gases. Now, there is a way, if you have the right technology, to mine them directly from planetary bodies or from your planets themselves. However, if you don't have them available, or you have already used all of those and you need even more, then you can make them synthetically as well. So we'll start with volatile motes. You can build the chemical factory or whatever it's called. This costs about 600 minerals in order to build the building, and you have to use a building slot. And then that produces 1 chemist job, and each chemist job consumes about 11 minerals in order to produce about 3 or 4 volatile motes. So quite expensive in order to get these volatile motes. Ideally, go for the natural extraction first, because you don't have to pay this mineral upkeep. You just have to extract it, kind of like you extract, say, like energy from an energy district or minerals from a mineral district. But once you run out of that, then you can start doing it this way, as you need to expand even more. Eventually, you do need to use the synthetics. The extraction normally isn't going to be enough to fuel your needs. And then, much in the same way, this works pretty much exactly the same for exotic gases. The only real difference here is exotic gases refinery only costs 500 minerals instead of 600. I don't know why this is different. I'm not really sure. I guess maybe it was a balancing thing. It requires a building slot, about 11 minerals per your refiner, and that produces about 3 to 4 exotic gases. You get the idea. And then moving on to rare crystals. Your rare crystal manufacturing is 600 minerals to build the building, much like the volatile motes building, and then another building slot. All of these cost about 3 energy and upkeep to upkeep the building itself. And then you have about 11 minerals go into 1 crystal refiner, whatever it's called, to about 3 to 4 rare crystals. Districts, this energy is, as long as the district exists, you have to pay this upkeep. So ideally with districts, you don't want to overproduce them. Ideally, you're only building districts when you have pops or are about to have pops to work those jobs. However, buildings, on the other hand, that require the building slots, you can click the disable button. That basically you lose the jobs temporarily, but you also don't pay the upkeep. As you're waiting for pops, you don't have to pay the upkeep of buildings. So you can re-enable them once you have the pops to work them. So I do recommend doing that, just to save a little bit of the upkeep of buildings that you have available but aren't using. If you conquer a planet and suddenly a lot of their pops disappear for some reason, and there's a ton of empty jobs, and you're waiting a while until you can fill those jobs again, then I recommend disabling those buildings of that new planet that you've acquired until you can fill up those jobs again. Or you can demolish them if they're not what you wanted. But if you already want those buildings on the planet, might as well save the mineral cost. But you can't do that for districts. Districts you always pay for, I guess because you're getting like the housing out of it. Whereas buildings, you're not usually getting any housing from buildings. The main way of getting amenities is if you build your hollow theaters, or the equivalent for the different Gestalt consciousnesses. It costs 1 building slot, about 400 minerals, which produces 2 to 4 entertainers. If you upgrade the building, it costs some exotic gases, but then you get 4 entertainers, much like some of the other buildings before, but there isn't a third upgrade. There's only 1 upgrade. Each entertainer costs about 1 consumer good. That's not right. Each entertainer produces about 10 amenities and about 2 unity, from what I've seen. Gestalt consciousnesses have maintenance drones instead. Some of these buildings, as you can see, they don't give you housing for their jobs, so you need to have housing some other ways. And you also need building slots. The solution to that is city districts. City districts are like industrial districts. They only require a district slot. You can kind of build a city anywhere as long as there's the space to build it, is the idea. It costs about 500 minerals and has about a monthly upkeep of 2 energy. And that leads to you get 1 building slot per city district, and then you get about 5 to 8 housing per city district. then you get 1 clerk job from this. Clerks produce about 4 trade value and about 2 amenities. As you can see, this amount of amenities is pretty pitiful. It can hardly even cover its own costs. You need to have about every other pop would need to be a clerk for most planets. So it's pretty bad conversion rate. So I don't recommend using clerks as your main source of amenities. Instead, I highly recommend using hollow theaters. That way you're having the fewest pops working jobs in order to give you amenities, whereas if you had clerks, you'd have to have a lot of clerks to meet your amenities requirement. And the trade value, if it's hooked up to a starbase, do note that this will increase your piracy, so you will actually have to protect the trade value if it's being collected from a starbase. Talked about kind of the main resource production, but there are also ways to make these generator districts even more potent. So right here we have a energy grid building, which costs about 400 minerals in a building slot. And this costs about 2 energy to upkeep, but it modifies the planet as a whole that you build it on. You can only build 1 per planet. It makes about +1 energy per technician on the planet as a whole. So if you build one of these on a planet that you have a ton of generator districts on, then you make these technicians do even more work per technician. So that's really important in order to make your planets more effective at their jobs for the cost of fewer pops. And that's kind of how you grow your economy as a whole. So this building also produces 1 technician, which works the same way as before. And then if you upgrade the building for an upkeep of exotic gases, then you can get an additional 2 energy per technician on the planet. And buildings like this, there are a few, is why it's important to specialize your planet. A planet that mostly only produces energy, or a planet that mostly only produces minerals, or so on. And then you upgrade one of these buildings on it, and that way you have just tons of technicians getting advantage of this bonus for as few of these buildings as possible. So that way you're paying as little of this upkeep and this upkeep to get this bonus. So that's a highly recommended way of getting your resources, to have a generator planet that just produces a lot of energy, or a mineral planet that produces a lot of minerals. So moving on to that, this, which works exactly the same way, but for minerals, it's 200 minerals cheaper to actually build this for some reason. And then it costs volatile motes instead of exotic gases, but then you get an additional +1 or 2, depending on if you've upgraded it or not, per miner on the planet as a whole. And it also produces some mining jobs, which work the same way as before. And then you have your agriculture processing hub, whatever that's called. And this is also a volatile motes upkeep. And then this produces about 1 to 2 extra food per farmer on your planet. Finally, the industrial districts have the same thing. So starting out, we have a alloy foundry building. So at its first upgrade, when you first build the alloy foundry, you just get 2 metallurgist jobs. And that's it. You don't get any of this bonus. But once you have the technology, you can upgrade this building to have 2 volatile motes, upkeep, which then gives you this bonus here. So you get 1 extra alloy, but 2 extra mineral upkeep cost per metallurgist on the planet as a whole. Why you would want to have a world that's only producing alloys, so that way you can have this building making your metallurgists even more potent for more jobs, so that way you're building as few of these buildings as possible, but getting this bonus on as many jobs as possible. That's where specializing your planet would be useful. And then also we have the consumer goods variant of that same building, which costs about 400 minerals and then about 2 to 8 energy. So these are quite expensive, but definitely worth it. Rare crystals once you upgrade it. So initially you start out with just these 2 jobs from this building, but once you upgrade it, you have a cost of rare crystals. So you get additional consumer goods per your artisans, but also you have to pay more minerals per your artisans on your planet as a whole. And also a very useful tool is the galactic market. You can use energy and you can convert it into these different resources here. So minerals, food, consumer goods, alloys, volatile motes, exotic gases, rare crystals, living metal, zero, dark matter. However, a caveat to this is that you actually have to have produced yourself one of these resources in order to have it show up in the market. You can't just, like, if you get an event that just gives you like 500 rare crystals or whatever, it doesn't show up in the market. The other thing that the market works is that as you buy resources, the price increases to kind of simulate the idea of supply and demand, that as there's less available, people hike up the price to get a better deal on the scarcity of that resource. And then the more you sell, it becomes overinflated and no one wants the mineral, so you have to drop the price for people to buy it because there's too many available for everyone. Each unit of minerals costs between 0.2 to 5, depending on where you're at in the supply and demand. You can't just buy one mineral on the market. You have to buy it in batches. But both minerals and food, you can buy 100, 500, 1,000, 5,000, or 10,000. And generally, if you can afford it, go for the highest one that you can afford, because the change between these two only happens when you click the button. So if the price is, say, like 2 per mineral, and then you click this button, you get that 2 price for the whole thing. However, and you click this button times 10, then each time you click the button, this is going to update and go, oh, you've bought some minerals. Now this is like 2.1. And oh, you bought some minerals. This is now 2.2. Oh, you bought some minerals. This is now 2.3, you know? So the price increases over time. So ideally, you want to buy in bulk. One thing I recommend, if you end up in the situation where you completely fill your energy stockpile, the number of your stockpile turns yellow, that means any of your monthly surplus is just being wasted and lost into the void. Or use your energy to buy some of these more advanced, really expensive ones, or alloys as well. That's good too. In order to still be generating energy, and you're basically converting energy into one of these more potent of value, you can store a ton of value as strategics, and then if you need that value back, then you can sell it. You could store a lot more value as, let's say, like living metal or dark matter than you could as energy. So if you wanted, like, say, convert minerals into alloys through the market, you would have to sell your minerals as energy, and then you'd have to buy alloys. So then you're paying this fee every time that a resource passes through here. So it starts at 30%, but different factors, you can get it down to 5% eventually. That's the minimum. Ideally, you only go through that fee once. So generally, this is another reason why you should produce a good surplus of energy. These resources don't exist in the galaxy. You can't actually run out of stuff on the market. You can always buy stuff on the market if you absolutely need to. No empire has to produce them. It's an illusion. It makes you feel like you're trading stuff, but you're not actually trading resources. So using the market, you can pretty much turn any of these resources, including the energy, into any other of these resources, including the energy. If you have a shortage developing in any of these resources, and you have another surplus in something else, you usually can keep everything afloat. The biggest thing that the market does is it buys you time to solve the problem at hand. And a final thought before I wrap this up. So like, say at the start of the game, you would like to build an industrial district. For one industrial district, at the beginning of the game, you're going to have about like 1 generator, maybe like 2 mining, and then 1 food, just because you want some more alloys. The cost kind of expands rapidly. And then in order to get researchers, you're also going to need to build industrial districts, which then of course have this cost. So you can start to see that like research becomes quite expensive. I can't tell you exactly how to balance all of that. There's tons of variables of what changes things, and then also that's part of the whole strategy of the game. Like, do you prioritize going for tons of unity, or do you prioritize going for tons of alloys? That's kind of up to you for your strategy and your playstyle. But hopefully this gives you something that you can look at, maybe use this to kind of get started. All of this probably looks very complicated, but I feel like personally for me, I don't have to like think about what I'm doing necessarily. I just kind of know approximately like, oh yeah, okay, I built a bunch of industrial districts. I need to get some more mining districts out. I hope this visualization was helpful. Thanks for watching, and goodbye.